And we're going. Okay, sick. What's up? We're back on the fucking podcast. I don't know. I think we're about 2 months off of our last episode. Probably the thing that's lapsed most in the cult empire and is asked for the least. So gets gets a little neglected sometimes. Um, we got special guests. We got Jenkin, poetry editor at Cult Mag, and we're joined today with PJ Lombardo, poet from Baltimore that we've published before. Kind of a legend. What's up, PJ?
What's up? Wow. Nobody's ever referred to me as kind of a legend before.
Yeah.
That feels nice.
Yeah, I really half-assed that intro there. I was like,
No, I
Baltimore.
like it. I like it. I feel like we got to set expectations. If you could actually set expectations just a little bit lower, so
Okay.
it's even more like low pressure for me,
Yeah,
that would
yeah,
be that'd be nice.
yeah. Some call him a legend. Not everyone though.
Or orbiting legendhood.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah,
PJ, how you doing, man? Thanks for coming on.
I'm doing pretty good, my friends. I just wrapped up. I just submitted grades for my classes, so I have a little bit of a break before my summer class starts up. Trying to spend some time catching up on reading that I've wanted to do for the last few months while I've been slammed. How about
Yeah.
you, Jake? How are you doing?
Dude, I'm running on fucking fumes.
I believe it, man. I believe it.
I started a new job this week at like a 4 a.m. bar, and I think I've worked every day for the last like 8 days. Like I'm out of my mind. But this feels good, dude. This is the first artistic thing I've done in years. So much needed to get back to this well timed. It's like it's been kind of crazy to kind of like try to manage the mag while in the midst of this too. I'm just like slipping out to do like one phone call here and there. But I'm doing all right. Um yeah. Um and Jenkin, how are you?
I'm doing swell. Semester's over. I'm trying to write I have to do a revision for an article, like a scholarly article. I have to remember to I have to do academic things in hopes that someday I can potentially maybe get a job. So working on a scholarly article right now, and
Nice.
yeah, just cruising
Cool.
through May.
Cool. Um, well, I wanted to do this episode to kind of, I don't know, circle around PJ and what he's up to, I guess, as a writer and as a publisher, because I do think there's something quite distinct about it that I don't know. I guess you could. I don't know if you would refer to it as a movement, PJ, or as a style, but there is something. I guess the surreal grotesque is how you refer to it. Is that right?
Yeah, so grotesque surrealist, that is the overall aesthetic of my magazine. Way too flattering to call it a movement, although we do find people who meet those criteria
Mm-hmm.
um, pretty consistently, which has been one of the most heartening aspects of my writing life so far, is finding exactly how many people um, are just producing really exciting work. So.
Yeah. Well, I will say, I guess as in terms of a movement or my understanding of it as a thing with followers is as soon as we published you, we kind of got a slew of other poets that were like direct descendants or directly related to you that like submitted to us. So then maybe you don't see it as such, but there are seemingly a lot of people intertwined in the thing that you're doing. Um, yeah. Um, so I guess maybe get could you give us like a little of a like I don't know rough sketch of what you consider the the surreal grotesque and how it's applied in your poetry.
Yeah, so I guess the phrase first popped into my head, or the idea of grotesque poetics entered my consciousness when I was working with a poet named Johannes Göransson, which I'm sure Jenkin you've crossed paths with probably
Oh,
pretty frequently.
oh yeah.
Um, We were in a workshop in one of his classes. I had written a poem. Uh, are either of you familiar with Keats's Endymion? John Keats' Endymion?
Yeah, yeah.
So
I,
I had rewritten a couple books from that long form poem. So I just done like heavily abridged versions of each of those books. In like long form poetic pieces. And the word that Johannes used to describe a lot of the, we'll say, bodily imagery, a lot of the kind of syntax, the mayhem in the syntax was grotesque. And then he went on to describe the etymology of the word grotesque coming from grottos in Europe, right? And the kind of art that they would find on the walls there, which included three themes, at least that he pulled out, right? Which were anatomy, hybridity, so like, hybrid human animals, that type of thing, and metamorphosis. So the idea of change, the idea of physicality, right? And yeah, so I noticed that without me really intending to or using that word yet. I had been working in that thread for years.
Mm-hmm.
And when I thought about other poems, other poets like M. Césaire, Will Alexander, people that I'd found really exciting, they also made use of those features. So I
mhm.
thought about what made poetry kind of distinct from other writing forms, other genres, and why I thought grotesque thematics were so enlivening for me. Uh, yeah, so that's kind of where I came up with that concept was through
Mm-hmm.
Johannes and through Keats and through those other poets that I mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. Does that answer your question?
No, yeah, yeah, no, definitely, yeah. And it's interesting to hear you talk about, I guess, the three like I don't know what you founding principles of like this etymology to the grotesque as this. I mean, two of them are what anatomy, hybridity, and metamorphosis, and I guess I mean, two out of three, and you could also, I guess, say all three of them have to do with this thing of like change, of like a dynamic entity that is like transforming into something else, lying at the heart of grotesquerie, which I find really interesting, and I do find evident in your own poetry um, that there does seem to be this focus on a changing of states of one thing moving into the next.
Right. Yeah. I think I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but why I think poetry lends itself to that dynamic is it has to do with like lineation, right, and
Mm-hmm.
enjambment, and how much of a productive driver that can be. Jenkin, actually, one observation that I've seen you make a couple times, just on social media or whatever, is the idea that the link between like poetry and music that uses like unusual time signatures. Like you talk about like
Mhm.
different kinds of math rock or whatever, or jazz,
Mhm.
having like a positive influence on someone's like understanding of poetics because it gives you a, a more dynamic view of how to use time, right?
Right. Right.
So that's where I think in terms of structure, the emphasis of change comes from. And the idea that I guess I use a lot of neologisms in writing. For anybody
Mm-hmm.
who's listening and maybe hasn't heard that word before, neologism is when like it's a combination of two different either words or uh, prefixes, suffixes, whatever that we place together in order to um, produce some new piece of language that articulates something distinct. So I see like the use of neologisms as an attempt to intervene in language and produce a change, Jake, like you were talking about.
Right. 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 Um, hell yeah. That's really interesting. I think I mean I just did a reading recently for the Boston Writers Room. I was reading the story that's coming out like soon, but I had written it a long time ago, And the guy running it, Spencer, who also is on Cult Meg, was asking about influences, and I was thinking about like that time, and I was like, well, that was like a time that I was getting into like real like a lot like noisier music, and I was starting to like conceptualize writing in this much more like abstract way as a moving of forces and a shifting of objects rather than progression of a story. Like understanding, I guess, like within the heart of like literary work is like some type of like force or energy that you are both dampening out and making bigger as you see fit. And and so yeah, I think of fiction in that way too, and I think Matt does as well. Like, if you ever talk to Matt about his fiction writing, the thing that he like is always searching for is propulsiveness. Is it's if he can locate a force that moves you through it, through the piece, that's what he's trying to do. It has nothing to do with like, oh, I want to make like a story that is like true to like my family or my understanding of the world. I mean, maybe that stuff happens, but the real thing is a little bit raw and like down to like a more like essential element of writing. Yeah.
I also I want to say too, sort of, I think like a lot of times when people think about grotesque, you know, immediately it's, oh, monstrous. That's like the the synonym for like how people think about grotesque. But like actually, you know, going backwards with that etymology to the actual sort of the transformative, um, the metamorphosis, the like hybridity. It's like, yeah, the grotesque can be monstrous. Those things can be monstrous, but yeah, it is more that propulsive. It is more that sort of like that new sort of like energy or time or movement time type of thing going on. Yeah, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. It's just one of those things about grotesque that it's like we all have these sort of, you know, colloquial understanding of the word, but actually like that's just sort of like the superficial layer, and then there's all this like sort of underlying energy.
Right. I
Right.
think that's the layer that gets isolated. Obviously, most in discussion, like if you say grotesque, people just like they kind of hear the word gross, right?
Mm.
But I do think there is some depth to that insofar as like the interventions that are being made both into language, into physicality, into narrative, whatever. That intervention, that propulsiveness, it can be very abrasive, and like embracing that abrasive aspect is something that when I find a writer who can do that really well, that that's something that I get a lot of mileage out of, I
Yeah.
guess.
Well, thinking about, I guess, like why like the impulse or the initial reaction for a lot of people of like of grotesque is gross, and and you know, maybe people aren't thinking about the etymology of it, and people aren't thinking about this like metamorphic element to it, but it is kind of like antithetical to like the understanding of a self, right? Like, and it is like in that sense gross. Like, um if you understand like literature in the same way that you understand like yourself, not as like a narrative, a story, a thing with like a precise beginning and ending and with reasoning for what you do, but rather just a collection of energies that are being moved about and shifted around in ways that are pleasing and displeasing. Um, like that is like a much more difficult way to understand yourself and reconcile, and frankly does feel quite gross to like label yourself as such. Um, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but that's how I feel.
No,
um,
I agree.
yeah, yeah, um, yeah. PJ, I also am interested in the influence of like atrocity. I guess I would say in your poetry. Um, I would say in the stuff that I've read and in the stuff that we've published, there is this uh, looming sense of doom in a lot of it, and there is this um, utilization of I guess the like technical language of destruction. Like you might say something about I can't remember. I think in the poem that we published, and maybe we should just read it. There are a few words that are like highly technical and highly related to just like the mechanisms of destruction that we find around us. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so I guess the role that destruction plays specifically with this, um, the manuscript that I pulled that poem from. So, Cooking, the poem you published, that's from a sequence of 20 ish poems, all titled with gerunds, right? Those ing verbs, each one titles those poems. And there is a sense of doom that pervades each of those. I thought it would be kind of clever to have the each poem thematically pertain to some gerund or some verb, right? And then express a feeling of futurelessness.
Mm,
The manuscript at large, that sequence and a few other sequences within this manuscript, it most broadly pertains to the idea of futurelessness.
right.
So that's explored through a variety of different forms and different approaches. In gerunds, there is specifically the idea of like action, every action you take bringing you closer to some like eschatological, uh, the you know, end of times, whatever.
Mm,
And the refrain "my children" gets brought up almost in every poem. So like
hmm
having in this like paranoid way, so like a paranoia around the future leading to uh, a sense of doom that no action can really pierce through.
Yeah.
So the technical language that I use in some of those poems, the more robotic or yeah, technical language, I guess, is coming from more of an aesthetic desire for balance
Mm,
because each of those pieces is written in a first person perspective,
yeah.
right? So I want to be able to balance like voice with a counterforce to for one thing to have the element of hybridity in there, and
hmm
also I just think that makes better writing. Like I want to have poems where somebody is able to pivot between different types of diction swiftly. I think that's just more engaging writing for me. So
Yeah. PJ, would you mind maybe reading the poem and we can kind of get a feel for what we're talking about here?
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the poem is called Cooking. A couple decades of basil, silent, unbounded, will soothe misanthropy's scathe. Come on over where the plastic wrap dances like fumes of napalmed garlic through your lungs. Skyscrapers worth my children, weapons worth the last mammalian hair on earth. Weep now, weep later, weep for the scent of pedantry and the maimed sparseness which ensues. Weep like 8 billion abandoned tractor trailers or a frying pan in wait to marry another warhead.
Hell yeah,
Yeah.
That's funny. Thank you.
What a wonderful poem.
that rules. Not to pat ourselves on the
Yeah.
back for
Yeah.
publishing it, but hell
No,
yeah.
no, thank you guys very much for putting this poem out. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was huge. Um no, I mean, God, yeah, it is it is, I would say even just like the sentiment of it is so I mean, both risky and really amazing, and I guess the way that it succeeds in its sentiment, because like yeah, I guess you were living in a state and time in which real like you can like look around and see the wagers being made and why, like, you know, another empty building going up just for the sake of like real estate speculation, while like more people don't get to go into a house every day. um and so yeah, I it's both has that gaze of, I don't know, understanding what the crumbling world around it, but while also not being like overwhelming, I guess, you know. And I think the precision of sound probably has a lot to do with that. It was really interesting to hear you read it too. I would when I have read it in the past, I did not read it with as many pauses as that.
Yeah, that's always I've been just I guess my inclination was always to like emphasize each line break with a pause. I've just done that my whole life with poetry. I don't know, Jenkin, if that's an inclination you have. But when I get to the end of a line, like to me it indicates that I stopped for a second.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and especially like with a with eschewing punctuation, or more like, you know, typical punctuation. Yeah, I mean, still having that there is just, I mean, from the utilitarian perspective of it, it's just very helpful for reading. Which I mean, this is just a general sort of like problem with like sort of reading more like experimental or more sort of like lexically inventive poems. It's like, how does one technically approach this?
Hmm.
But I think that that does definitely align with sort of like the disjointedness and the sort of like the military anxiety of the poem too. I think it really works with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Jake, if I could just comment on something you said earlier about the like producing a something you said something along the lines of like producing a feeling without just like describing it, or
Hmm.
I guess
Yeah.
just to get to the point of it, um, I'm interested in expressing something affectively and not didactically. So
Hmm.
that the phenomenon that you described, like real estate speculation driving production in this country broadly defined. Um, I don't think the role of poetry is just literally to describe that process. I think it is to like create some type of simulacra for it, like a diorama of that um, phenomenon, express it in language as an object rather than as a medium of communication.
Right. Right.
Mm.
Right. Um yeah, and I guess, I mean, that is, I guess, both a more effective way of conveying that feeling and getting it to arrive in people. Um and also, I guess, in terms of I don't know. I was watching this is one of those moments where everything I've been reading and watching seemed to be like meeting up in a nice way as meant to happen. I was watching Hyper Normalization by Adam Curtis. Have you guys seen this?
Mm.
Yeah, for sure.
Um but in the beginning he's talking about like how like the concept of like understanding the present, you can't really do it through like looking at like the narrative of history. You have to like go and look at a few people and understand the dreams that they had at the time and what they were like moving toward. So like when you look at the world, you don't say like, oh, this was like a planned thing, this was like a one like actor X had plan A to have result B. It was like um, someone in uh, some country somewhere had a dream and an ambition, and so did someone elsewhere, and they're all like mingling with each other. And like if you can kind of like start to look at the world in that way and start to understand it as a an expression of people's dreams, then you can kind of start to see like why it doesn't make sense, or like a lot of stuff happens that you can't really find a precise justification for, but happen nonetheless. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the sort of like in response to that, I think I saw this on like a Hampton Think sort of just a social media type of Instagram lefty graphic, but basically it was like the whole like dream of Reaganomics is like sort of like kind of coming to fruition now, because like basically the richest 10% of America is like basically like driving the whole is the one thing like preventing recession right now,
Mm-hmm.
like, and that it wasn't necessarily like that wasn't like the firm goal, but it's sort of like if this reality comes to fruition that the richest people and their consumer habits are like basically keeping sort of current capitalist society from imploding, like so be it, that's fine with us, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I really and I also I see that sort of like reality, in it's related to the sort of the real estate sort of idea here. The skyscrapers with my children, like, yeah, I mean, we are living in sort of the fantasy of the 10% like richest Americans and their fancy brunches or whatever, their trips to
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Amalfi Coast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's this like solipsistic form of like negate like negativity, right? Like people wouldn't define it that way themselves, but it is this idea that like I don't know. I think about Reaganomics, the idea of trickle down economics coming from this place that like fundamentally the only way to create any type of just society in their heads is to just maximize the profit motive, right? So just to remove all like public fetters from the pursuit of profit, and the idea is that that will then move throughout the rest of like a given society. And in
Mm-hmm.
reality, as we're seeing come to fruition right now, it's just producing people that are ever more overworked, experiencing like a greater degree of imposed scarcity every day,
Mm-hmm.
and like this type of paranoia. I mean, the idea, yeah, the skyscrapers worth my children line, um, the mapping of like a value system on top of all organic life, I think it produces a very solipsistic consciousness that is definitely distributed throughout the upper echelons of like American society,
Mm-hmm.
but it's widespread too throughout like the middle class. Um, I
Yeah.
think that the middle class is the neuroses are maybe more visible there even because it pertains more to like shared experiences. Does
Yeah.
it make sense?
No.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um.
I mean, I think you can even see that in like sort of like Trump's cabinet, like the people who are less rich seem to be like the most absolutely buck wild. There's
Right.
like a tax bracket for like sort of crazed fascist delusion.
Yeah. Yeah. I was reading Hinterland by Phil A. Neal. Have you guys heard of this one? Um
I've heard of it. Yeah.
it's really good. But the way that he like conceptualizes, I guess, like American neoconservatism versus contemporary leftism, or like or establishment leftism, is really interesting. And both, I guess, in he's I guess his point is like both sides understand that they're playing a game of like I don't know, capitalism is a game that must always be expanding, and even when you enter into a state that things can no longer expand, you have to like find ways to expand, which means you have to find ways to exploit. um but I guess his point is like American conservatives or neoconservatives are like way more, have a way more like cynical perspective on American politics. In their eyes, like the possibility of returning to some like great country is was never there. And you can, and I think it's like you can kind of feel that when you listen to, like, I mean, that's why you like Trump is like a totem for this, for like like literally saying we are going to return to America while like being full of shit and being like, and everyone kind of like accepts that everything that he says is not true, but he has to say it anyway in like a very like Soviet way. Um, and I guess like you, to participate in American neoconservatism, you have to accept that kind of like dual reality, that someone has to say something that harkens back to this idea of a political state, but in your heart you have to be, I don't know, a cynical, cold-blooded animal that is just playing for power at this point. And Phil, in Phil Neal's estimation, is that the right understands this much better than the left. The left is sincerely attempting to return to a, I don't know, a country of goodness or whatever the fuck you want to call it, and not playing just a simple power game.
Mm.
Yeah. Um, PJ, I wanted to move to you as a publisher as well, because not only are you a great poet, you are also the I guess co-founding editor
Co-founding editor, yeah.
co-founding editor of Grotto, a poetry journal that is based on the aesthetic we've been describing here. How long has Grotto been going?
So Grotto kicked off like early 2023. Yeah, I had the idea a little earlier. I remember I heard about some magazine shutting down. I forget which one it was, but there was some magazine that was closing. Maybe was it Typo? I think it was Typo magazine that was closing.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sitting at this like kind of dead end temp job that I had. I was never going to get health insurance, and I was just like going to barely keep making rent or whatever sometimes. Uh, and I was thinking about, well, one day all these publishers are just going to be shut down, and I'm not going to have anywhere to share very this practice that is very dear to me.
Mm-hmm.
So then I realized, as right after I had that kind of self pitying thought, I was like, oh, I that's because I have to. It's because I have to make it.
Right.
So I guess that is one of the things that I get so excited about with the independent poetry scene is there is very much this uh, drive for everybody to contribute and to find ways to contribute outside of just writing poems.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so that's where I first kind of hatched the idea, and then about 6 months later, me and my friend Max Rab, who we were both living in Chicago at the time, decided that we were gonna reach out to people that we really admired and start our first issue. So it's been going really great so far. I'm really grateful to everybody who sends work in, and
Mm-hmm.
we're about to put out issue 7. Yeah, issue 7 this summer within the next few weeks,
Let's
probably.
let's go.
Nice.
Um, yeah, I mean, I guess from our own background, that was more or less like how I arrived at starting Cult as well. Was kind of like surveying the landscape after like a period uh of deep fiction study and being like, well, like there's nowhere really to put the thing that I want to put. I'm not seeing these things like and it was kind of like a recognition of being like, well, like I think I just have to like make a space for this. And it's been really interesting to see. I mean, I really feel like in the last like 3 years, like there's been a lot of new journals pop up, new magazines pop up that are just, I guess, are independent and are way different from what had been happening prior. I do feel like we're in the midst of, I don't know, of something interesting happening in publishing.
Yeah, I think like I don't know. People are definitely getting sort of like fed up. Feel. I mean, kind of fed up with like everything in the world, but like
Right, right.
especially like writers, especially writers that kind of want to like do something a little a little to a lot left of center, who don't necessarily just want to like write stuff for sort of a crowd of kind of like tenured adjacent people. They're a lot of stuff's appearing. A lot of stuff's appearing, and I think there's always this criticism that goes, it's like, oh, no one's ever going to read your your tiny little whatever. But it's like, I guess my response to that is always like who gives a shit?
Yeah.
Let's do it, because there is going to be people that'll read it, and even I, it could be 20 people, and that
Right.
I think that fucking awesome. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, to piggyback off what Jenkins said, I think, when I was learning how to write poems that I enjoyed myself, I thought about what I didn't love and that was endemic at the time, which is like this like neo confessional
Hmm.
kind of poetry writing that I found to be very like egoistic and short sighted. Now, I mean, if you want to write poems about your own life or like in like a literal way, there's lots of poetry that I actually do like that maybe could fit into that category in some degree. But there was a ubiquity to the genre and like a lack of just like a slackness to it that
Hmm.
I, especially as a younger man, had quite a bit of animosity for. So I think if there's some problem space or some gap in like a creative field, people are like losing their NEA funding and stuff, and a lot of those older institutions that were supposed to bolster creative expression, a lot of them, just ended up reifying uninteresting work. So if you
Right.
think that there's some gap in the creative space that you might be able to contribute something to, even if it is, as Jenkins said, just 20 people reading like experimental poetry,
Yeah.
it things change all the time, and I find that we're trending in a much more positive direction. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I do think like it's difficult when you come out of anything like graduate creative studies or any type of institutional creative study, because I mean the thing that you really like are taught there is how to like take part in the like big business of literature and how to contribute to that thing. And it's really hard to like find people that are interested in just making things that are a bit more immediate, and understanding that is like just as valuable, if not more valuable. um if you can, make a sincere connection with someone, and if it's just one person, you put a thought into their head, I mean, I think that's incredible. More so than selling a bunch of stuff, it's really nice to hear you talk about that. I did want to talk to you about conceptualizing the journal as a source of metamorphosis, being your own, I guess, entity that can create change or create a dynamism within literature and within the world. I was reading this morning um, this book. Have you heard of Richard Costel? Butchering it. Richard Coastal Nets. That's how you say it. I don't know.
No, I have not. I have not
Okay,
heard
cool.
about
Well, the
that.
book, the
That is
title.
a hard name to say, by the way, Jake. Give yourself some credit.
Yeah.
That's not an easy one.
I don't know if he's still alive, so maybe he is a New Yorker. But anyway, um, the title is literally Metamorphosis in the Arts, which I thought was quite interesting that with the conversation, and he's talking about, I guess, his approach to this book, which is like just a survey of how art was changing within the 1960s, and he's conceptualizing it in this way where he's talking about like art is always changing, even like during the periods of time that people say like, after like the fucking like Jackson Pollock era, people were like, well, art's kind of done changing. That was the end of change there. um and his point is like art is always dynamic and it's always moving. It's just in there's brief periods of time that the constant motion and fluidity of it links up with radical ideas within culture, and that is how we understand um these like historic moments like the 60s. in which um, this moving entity that is always in motion was harnessed by ideas of a larger cultural establishment. And basically, the 60s, I think in terms of cultural recognition of a ubiquity of cultural recognition of, I guess, the truth of the Western world. I do see a lot of parallels between now and like in the 60s, right? Like this more than ever, at least in my lifetime in recent history, feels like this moment where like pretty much everyone has a sense of what is occurring, and if you don't, then you're kind of adopting like a state of willful ignorance, and if you're not, like you'll at least be understood as such. Like there's really no like longer a chance for people to be like, oh well, I just want to like live a positive life. It's kind of a point in which you have to state opinions and tell people exactly where you stand on things, which I haven't. It feels much different from how things felt maybe even a decade ago. Um, and I guess thinking about that within the world of publishing, within the world of putting art out into the world is really interesting. Is that regardless, this like dynamic entity of like art, of literature, of writing would be going on, but it does feel like there's this moment in which like things feel a little bit more charged than they might have prior. And I wonder if you were thinking about that when you were putting together the journal, as well as just like the idea of change and metamorphosis, as well as just a as a publishing entity. And,
Right. So that's I really love that thought. I'm still digesting it a little bit. I do think that, as I said earlier, when I was imagining what publishing was going to look like if every, independent press like just kind of shut down their website for one reason or another, like what we would be left with was just kind of a depressing um, prospect to me. So I did want to intervene in that way. I think that there is some truth to the idea that any creative project that has a lasting impact on the broader zeitgeist is not only, it's in part an expression of its merits, but it's not only an expression of its merits, right? There's other forces that are at play at the time. I don't know if, at least I don't, maybe I'm not enough of like a Napoleonic uh, person to understand the moment I'm in and
right.
perfectly cater, a publishing project like
Hmm.
based on those forces. I just thought about poets that I really admired and wanted to give them another place where they could share their work.
Hmm.
I think that maybe is part of the secret to producing a positive intervention is just having a realistic perspective on the field that you're, whatever field you're working in. What are the trends? Are there trends that you think are can be made positive use of? Are there trends that you want to critique? And then um, just putting something out there and seeing what sticks.
Right.
I feel really lucky that anybody submits work to our magazine or reads it. If there is any type of broader resonance like to our time, I mean, I'm sure there is. I don't know if I'm the most qualified to express express that exactly.
Hmm.
I don't even know if there's not one particular change that I was looking to make when I started Grotto, other than producing a space for more confrontational poetry and poetics. Does that make
Hmm.
sense? Does that answer the question? Am I
Yeah, yeah. I it does, and and I'm sorry if it didn't. I don't know if it really even took the form of a question. I was kind of going off there for a sec. Uh,
No, that's very exciting though. I'd love to please send me the name of that book again at the end of the so I
yeah,
can
I will. I will.
critique.
Um, yeah, I guess I guess it's interesting to hear. Uh, your thoughts on it as well, is like, perhaps like a recognition of the moment, but not a an intent at the core of your publishing process to be like this, um I don't know, Napoleonic poetic figure. Though you are, yeah, you can say whatever you want, but um yeah, dude, the surreal grotesque is a movement, and Grotto is the home of it, baby. um okay, fuck yeah. What else I got, dude? Jenkin, come on, man. Throw this guy a question.
Um, I guess in regards to sort of like thinking about how like the grotesque surreal differs from just the surreal in general. I don't know. I guess I was thinking about like um really kind of like, I guess it's like sort of like cynical thoughts about like people who are sort of like doing surrealism, or people that are like doing language poetics, or people that are really the people that are doing it in any art form, like sort of harkening back to really like 20th century avant-gardisms. Like, I guess the question is like, okay, how do we do that in a way that like isn't just sort of like, I don't know, kind of like a plastic like recreation. Like, I don't know. And I guess I was thinking about that in relation to myself too, because I do a lot of like languagey worky type stuff. But also at the same time, it's like, oh, I don't want to just like, be Pianman Redux. So I guess like how when you think about the grotesque surreal, how how do you like how do you how do you envision it like getting over, I don't know, the problem of like, oh, is this derivative, or is, I don't know, like, or is that even a problem to you? Like, yeah,
Well,
which is
in terms of just specifically the word derivative, I do imagine that all artworks derive from other artworks.
mm-hmm,
So I'm not super concerned about sounding derivative wholesale, right?
yeah,
I can think of certain types of like 20th century experimentalism that I wouldn't just want to like rehash. And I do think there's a difference between like a pastiche and an artwork that might be a little bit derivative in one aspect or another.
Mm.
I think like a pastiche, what people are looking at, what people are focused on when they're engaging with your art, is the uh, elusive aspect of it. So if you watch, like, I don't know, if you watch some movie and you're like, oh, this is a pastiche of like a different director, the whole time you're thinking like, oh wow, they really understand this other director, right? So when I'm writing work that maybe
mm-hmm,
takes use of people like somebody I know we're both a fan of, Zukowski, right? Or Césaire, like I mentioned earlier, these are people who I think about a lot when I'm writing. I want to vector my work so that my addressee is different than theirs. I definitely don't have the same addressee as Césaire, and I think Zukowski, even though, yeah, I mean, like, Marxist with like a habit for intervening in syntax in pretty severe and you could say mechanical ways. Um, I mean, I have a lot of those features, but my the content is of a different type.
yeah, yeah.
And
That's good to
I
know. That also is very heartening for me, because it's something that I self-consciously and insecurely worry about sometimes.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
I definitely feel the same way. The only other thing I would add on to that is I think voice is a big part of it. I like to have speakers that are very like vocal, and have like uh, a a very distinct way of speaking that is maybe closer to my own conversational tone, right? Or just a conversational tone. So by virtue of the fact that's very different than a lot of the 20th century stuff that I like. So I think you can take a materialist approach and say, okay, I admire these writers. I don't want to merely emulate them. What aspects of my life in my time are distinct,
Mm.
and then how can I like transpose that into a poetic technique. That's
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
my approach, at least.
Yeah. Yeah. Hell yeah. Um, PJ, what do you think? Are you happy with the pod? You're feeling seen and heard? Is there anything else that
I'm feeling seen and heard and a little sleep deprived. So
Okay.
if I was talking illiterate, please forgive me. But I was very grateful to speak with you guys. You guys had good thoughts on my work. Thank you so much for inviting me
Yeah, yeah,
to
yeah.
come.
That was awesome.
Swag,
Um,
swag.
yeah. So, PJ, thanks for coming on. Like we said, check out Grotto Journal. PJ, I'm sure you've got stuff coming out. Is there anything else you want to direct people towards
Well, new Grotto coming out, and if you are in, well, when is this coming out?
next week? Maybe.
Okay, so if it comes out earlier next week, I'm going to be in Philadelphia. So if you live in
Oh,
Philadelphia
what day
and
is
you want to
that?
come, that's Friday. Oh, well, there's another one. I'm actually going to Philly twice. So there's one on Monday, but it's probably not going to come out before then.
Okay.
Hopefully, I saw you at Poets Row. And if
Yeah.
not, I'm going to be at a box press reading at the Da Vinci Art Gallery
Whoa.
in
That's how you know.
Philadelphia.
That's how you know it's one of the
Yeah,
best art
you
galleries.
couldn't call it Da Vinci unless it was good. It's true.
Oh my god, dude, you're going to the Da Vinci.
Yeah,
Dude, shout out, big shout out to Corey. Good shout out to Box Press as well. We'll we'll
Yeah.
we'll, we'll get this thing out before then, and maybe you can use it as a promotional tool. Um, okay, sick, dude. Well, dude, really appreciate you coming on and talking with us. Everyone in Philadelphia that's listening to it right now, get to the House of Da Vinci on Friday.
yes.
Da
The
Um,
Da
Vinci.
Vinci Code.
All right.
okay, awesome, PJ. Thank you so much. All
Yeah,
right.
peace out, guys. Good
See ya.
talking.
See. Later.